In a sea of UFC fighters that prop up their careers on controversy, alcohol brands, bad-mouthing other fighters, or generally riling up the crowds in a frenzy, Khabib was always less outspoken and did most of his talking in the octagon. Most fighters put on a show outside the cage, often trying to attract audiences with their antics, not their skills. Khabib captured the imagination of millions of fans around the world without resorting to such antics. Inside the octagon, he chatted with his opponents while smothering them with punches and mauling them with his fists. The charismatic Dagestani was fearless in the cage, and now he's channeling his lifetime of learning how to be the perfect MMA fighter to his brothers in arms. When he fought, Nurmagomedov didn't fight only because of the fans. He fought to make his people proud. His training partners, his friends, and relatives back home in Dagestan. Most of all, he strived to do better in the eyes of his parents, especially his late father, Abdulmanap. According to the religion of Islam, the relationship between parents and children is one of the most sacred bonds a person can have while walking this earth. Therefore, it's essential to do good before the eyes of the parents, since the children are, in a way, part of their parents, sharing their DNA and owing their existence to their father and mother. One could see that in the relationship between Khabib and his father Abdulmanap. Khabib has repeatedly said that he couldn't be where he was without his father. It pained Khabib when his father could not be by his side when he fought due to visa issues, and always talked about the influence his father has on his development as a person and a fighter. Love for family is what shaped Khabib Nurmagomedov into the man, the fighter, and the coach he is today. So let us enter the realm of one of the most devastating, ruthless, and determined people who have ever stepped in the UFC octagon and see where the path takes us. Khabib Nurmagomedov was born in the Dagestani village of Sildi in September 1988. Being a native of Var, he was born to a family that cherished and practiced martial arts. Most of the village members were wrestlers from many generations. His father Abdulmanap Nurmagomedov, a Soviet forces military veteran, was also a martial artist who earned championship titles during his stint in freestyle wrestling and Sambo in Ukraine. His uncle Nurmagomed became the Sambo world champion in 1992, while his other uncle on his mother's side was a master of sports and freestyle wrestling. It was his father who imparted a love for martial arts to Khabib when he started training wrestling with his son when he was just 5. And he was a regular member of wrestling matches and sparring since that age. Abdulmanap may have trained youth in Dagestan to excel in martial arts, but he also offered an alternative life to those youngsters. A life that was more than simply joining the military or resorting to various vices in a life of reckless hedonism. An example of his dedication was that he turned the ground floor of his 2-story building into a gym where he could train his students in different martial arts. Khabib Nurmagomedov was talented even from his youngest age, and under the strict guidance of his father, reached a high level in wrestling by age 12, judo by age 15, and combat sambo by age 17. Before he turned 18, Khabib was one of the most fearsome wrestling opponents anyone could face. He trained judo under the famous coach Jafar Jafarov and learned the basics of gi wrestling, something his father deemed very important for a martial artist to master. It was in 2005 that Khabib tried his hand at combat sambo for the first time. Only 2 years later, he became one of the best combat sambo athletes in his weight class, training with athletes that were older than him and following the footsteps of his older brother Magomed, who was a member of the Dagestani national wrestling team when he was 16. Khabib won the Combat Sambo World Championship twice, in 2009 and 2010. and secured wins at the Pancration and Grappling Europe Championships. Khabib's upbringing was unconventional in many ways, and his training even more so. Surely you've seen the videos of him wrestling with a bear somewhere in the Dagestani mountains. His dedication to excellence was not to be disputed by anybody, man or animal. Khabib remembers, "I remember I asked my father back then, what if he bites me? And he said, you bite him too. You have teeth too. That's how my whole life was, in competition. You either become better or break down." This video reflects my whole life. Later on in life, when he was preparing for UFC stardom, his father pushed him to be prepared in every way. He ran the steep Dagestani mountains in the bitter cold, steeling his resolve and enduring grueling workouts that were not to be matched by the resistance offered by his opponents. What's surprising is that Khabib didn't really want to be a fighter. He wanted to work in security. His father had other thoughts. If you work somewhere, you're not an athlete anymore. It means you have another job. If you are an athlete, you must live it. You must get up early, go training, come home, eat, and sleep. I will give you everything you need. You need money only for water and public transport. We have food at home. Around that time, Khabib saw the potential he had in martial arts and saw that a bright future may await if he completely immersed himself in that path. After watching a video of MMA events, he was excited to try out in the world of martial arts. His hero back then was legendary Russian martial artist Fedor Emelianenko, who was at his prime and pummeled his opponents left and right as Khabib did further down the road. Nurmagomedov made his MMA debut in 2008 at the Ukrainian promotion CSFU Champions League against Vusil Bayramov. In what would become one of his signature moves, Khabib submitted Bayramov in the first round via submission by triangle choke in the 3rd minute of the fight. The domino has started. He next entered the Pancration Artyom Cup and again showed his enormous potential. Khabib won 3 fights via unanimous decision on the same night. And only a month after his MMA debut victory, Khabib's tenacity was on full display that night and was only a glimpse of what would follow in the ensuing years for the Dagestani native. The train was rolling with no signs of stopping. But after those 3 wins on the same night, Khabib had an almost 10-month-long break before returning to fighting. After the break, he moved to welterweight and competed at the Sumatra Fighting Championship 3 tournament. Again, he had more than 1 fight on the same night. Only this time, he was far more ruthless with his opponents and finished both of them via TKO. Upon his 6-fight winning streak, he attracted the attention of the big Russian M1 Global promotion, where he made his debut in November 2009. He submitted the dangerous puncher and future Bellator star Shabullah Shamalayev, and 5 months later, Khabib defeated another future big name, Ali Bagov, who went on to become one of the top welterweights of the ACA promotion. After securing 2 more wins under the M1 banner, Khabib moved to Pro FC in 2011, another Russian promotion. Again, there was no stopping him. He won 6 fights in a year during his stint there, each one comfortably and confidently. Those wins secured him a pro record of 16 wins in a row without a single loss. It's hard to ignore talent such as the one that Khabib possesses. After notching 16 wins without losses, naturally the UFC came knocking. Early in 2012, Khabib was signed to the promotion with a 6-bout contract.
I want to become UFC champion. If I cannot beat Yaquinta Pettis or Felder, how I can call this?
All the training and discipline paid off. Khabib had the chance to show the world what he was made from. In his debut fight under the UFC banner, he faced Iranian Kamal Shalaris. Nurmagomedov was an underdog in this fight, but looked anything but one. One thing was clear during the fight. Khabib's weakness was his undeveloped striking and stand-up game. The UFC debut of Khabib was a far cry from the Khabib during his championship stint, something that's absolutely understandable. But one way or another, Khabib always got his way in the octagon. Later in his career, it seemed that Nurmagomedov was trying to show the world that he was as good at striking as he was at wrestling. That's still debatable, but nevertheless, you have to respect Khabib for working on his stand-up game and improving it over time. Khabib handled Chalorus easily, and even took Chalorus with a sweeping left hook after the Iranian put much pressure on Khabib during the opening round. It was a Khabib show from then on. Nurmagomedov confidently took the fight in his hands and finished Chalorus with a rear naked choke. He not only showcased what he could do on the biggest stage, but with his victory, he also paved the way for many other Russian athletes to follow in his footsteps and thrive in multiple promotions. Khabib is thought to have never lost a match in his professional career, and has only lost a couple of rounds in all his fights, which no other fighter can boast of. He hasn't been beaten up, bled, or mauled in the same way he punishes his adversaries. His toughest challenges came from the most unexpected places, which was the case with his second and one of his most disputed UFC wins. Khabib's victory over Gleison Tibau at UFC 148 is still up for debate even today. Many analysts believe his record should have read 28-1 at the finish and call this bout a robbery. Others contend the opposite, but in any case, it's one of Khabib's most contentious fights. Khabib was competing in the UFC for the second time, while Tibau was making his 16th trip in the octagon. Despite being a UFC rookie, Nurmagomedov entered the bout with a 17-0 record, and the matchmakers favored him to win. Lacking the proper experience in the UFC and facing a seasoned veteran of the game, Tibau stopped each and every takedown attempt made by Nurmagomedov during the bout. It was the first of Nurmagomedov's 2 straight battles where he couldn't secure a takedown. To be fair, in his next fight, Nurmagomedov would knock out Diego Tavares. Even the fact he faced a much more experienced fighter didn't prevent Nurmagomedov from pushing the tempo and dictating how this fight unfolded. As usual, he was the more active fighter, but in the second and third rounds, Tibau had a few instances where it looked like he caught Nurmagomedov with punches that injured the future lightweight champion. Khabib continued to move forward, however, as if nothing had happened. What was remarkable was that Tibau appeared to score a few takedowns, though the judges only counted one of them as successful. Tibau threw knees at Khabib's torso as they drew near. When he was in the octagon, Nurmagomedov's gas tank appeared to be limitless, and the same was true in the bout with Tibau. He appeared to have done enough to win because he had the deeper gas tank and was more active in the last round. However, the results indicated that Khabib was clearly the superior fighter and won 30-27 on a unanimous decision. Such victories are only possible when one fighter completely controls the other. So the final scorecard shocked many spectators and analysts because this was a close bout. Tibau had the advantage in total strikes, 46-33, and won the significant strike battle, 28-25. In no round, neither combatant received more than 10 noteworthy blows. In round 3, Tibau was given 1 takedown, while Nurmagomedov received a takedown score of 0-13. When the win was declared, Khabib went to the floor, tears flooding his face. He was ecstatic that he continued his winning streak. However, it showed that even he was surprised at the end result. The fight wasn't exciting, and no man did enough to really be confident that they got the win. Yet it demonstrated that 30-27 wins aren't always ones where a fighter showcases his dominance against the other. During and after the fight, Joe Rogan was riding the Tibau train. He was stunned that the results were announced that Nurmagomedov swept the scorecards. It showed that many people saw a different movie while sitting in the same theater. It was one of the most dividing fights in UFC history. Rogan was impressed by Tibau's superb takedown defense, but neglected Nurmagomedov's successful strikes. Still, Nurmagomedov's constant pressure and his constant trying to strike his opponent went to his advantage. It was a very close fight.
Before they announced the judge's decision, did you think that you had done enough to win the fight?
Для него тоже хоть и поражение, это большой опыт.
I think that I felt that I did win this fight simply because I was always in control, always had the cage control, dominant control at all times. You know, the opponent was backing up quite a bit. Didn't make this fight as interesting as it could have been otherwise. Gained pretty good experience from this as well, you know, with a wrestler like myself.
Yeah, I never did the fight, you know, for a big surprise for me, big surprise for Khabib too, because Khabib, tough fight, close fight, I don't know, I'm talking my coach, everybody, tough fight, but you win, it's good. They up the arm for Khabib, man, everybody surprised, Khabib, wow, cry. In this fight, very, very, very tough, very, very close.
It's hard to really say that the fight was a robbery. At the same time, no one would have argued if the judges had given the win to Tibau. Some think this fight puts a stain on Khabib's career. However, if you've been following his career with attention, you'd know that Khabib had seen many tougher opponents than Tibau and mauled them until they couldn't take any more. Nevertheless, Khabib got the win and continued his undefeated record. It was time to focus on future challenges. In his third UFC fight, Khabib would face Brazilian fighter Thiago Tavares in his homeland of Brazil. Fighting in a hostile environment, there were doubts about how Khabib would respond to this occasion. He answered the critics swiftly and brutally. Khabib wasn't known for his world-class striking, so nobody foresaw how the fight would unravel. Anytime Tavares tried to kick, Nurmagomedov countered, and anytime Tavares threw a punch combo, Nurmagomedov countered, demonstrating superior timing, fighting IQ, and improved striking. Not even 2 minutes deep into the fight, Khabib caught Tavares with a left hook. Tavares quickly went down, and Khabib proceeded to maul the Brazilian with a fury of elbows to the face. After an endless series of unresponded blows, the referee had enough and stopped the fight. Nurmagomedov showed a weapon in his arsenal that many fans believed he didn't have, and he also gave another reason for his opponents to be afraid of him. The first truly serious opponent for Khabib was the future champion, the Brazilian Rafael dos Anjos. However, that didn't stop Khabib from dominantly defeating him. Thanks to his huge advantage in wrestling, dos Anjos was one of the hottest talents in the UFC. But even then, each fighter, no matter how good he was believed to be, looked inferior when he shared the octagon with the Dagestani. Khabib did what he always did. He smothered the Brazilian with wrestling combinations and didn't leave any breathing room for dos Anjos. It was a clear win for Khabib. The bout between Nurmagomedov and dos Anjos happened in April 2014, and in September he was supposed to fight UFC veteran Donald the Cowboy Cerrone, but an unlucky injury streak disrupted his plans. The Russian sustained a serious knee injury that scrapped the fight and forced Khabib to take a long break. The first attempt to return in a bout against Cerrone was made in May 2015, but Khabib's health failed again. A whole series of injuries continued, and at the end of October, he injured a rib, being the reason for the cancellation of his fight against Tony Ferguson for the first time. In a short span, he ruptured the cruciate ligament and injured a rib, forcing the Dagestani out of the game for an indefinite period. Khabib's start to his UFC career couldn't have been better. He had 6 dominant wins against tough opponents. His debut win against Kamal Shalaris was followed by wins over Gleison Tibau, Thiago Tavares, Abel Trujillo, Pat Healy, and Rafael dos Anjos. But that period was still tarnished by the traumas and injuries he suffered. During that period, Khabib wanted to quit. He's had enough of the damage that was being done to his body, and his spirit apparently was also affected by those traumas. His father, Abdulmanap, was the man that was responsible for getting his son back on track. In an interview Nurmagomedov gave about that period, he said the words that would define Khabib's later rise and triumph. The patient person wins. So Khabib did just that. He waited, worked on his recovery, and watched other fighters pick up all the glory. Fighters that he already beat or would have beaten. During that time, 2 Anjos became an interim lightweight champ. It was a difficult sight for Khabib, but it only fueled his resolve to come back stronger. Then, on April 17, 2016, at UFC on Fox 19, Nurmagomedov was supposed to face one of the most dangerous lightweights at the time, Tony El Cucuy Ferguson. Ferguson wreaked havoc in the division during that period and was on a 7-fight win streak. A matchup with the Dagestani left fans salivating at the thought of the two of them facing each other in the octagon. However, fate would intervene again. It wasn't the first nor the last time that had happened. On December 11, 2015, Ferguson and Khabib were scheduled to fight at the Ultimate Fighter 22 finale. Nurmagomedov pulled out of the bout due to injury. Now it was Ferguson's time to back out. During the whole training period, Ferguson teased the Russian fighter for his sensitivity. But 2 weeks before the fight, Tony pulled out of the fight due to lung issues. The UFC was forced to look for a replacement, and Daryl Horcher's name came up. It was a disheartening scenario for the fans. However, the UFC had to make do. So instead of Ferguson, Khabib faced Daryl Horcher, a promotional newcomer with an MMA record of 12-1, with 6 knockout wins attached to his name, at a catch weight of 160 pounds. Horcher hadn't yet made a name for himself in the UFC, and who better to do that against than the undefeated Khabib Nurmagomedov? Easier said than done, but Horcher had one thing going for him. This was Khabib's first fight since he defeated Rafael dos Anjos nearly 2 years before their bout due to lingering knee injuries. It stands to reason that Horcher was hoping that ring rust would do him some favors in the octagon that evening. If it were any other fighter, that would be a plausible hope to have. But Khabib Nurmagomedov is no ordinary fighter. You see, for Nurmagomedov, there is no ring rust simply because he's always inside the ring, training, sparring, and teaching. The MMA sport is deeply embedded into his DNA. Moreover, the Eagle needed a successful return to the octagon to remind the world of his talent. He was hungry, and that showed in their fight. Khabib Nurmagomedov simply put on a clinic against Horcher. After a feeling-out process in the first round, Horcher felt confident and even landed a couple of punches and successfully defended a takedown attempt. That's more than many other opponents can say they achieved against the Dagestani. Before Horcher could find more success and pick up momentum, however, Nurmagomedov committed to a double leg and effortlessly lifted and slammed Horcher to the ground. From the top position, Nurmagomedov was active with vicious ground-and-pound strikes, not letting his opponent escape easily. His punches and elbows opened up Horcher and then moved into the mount during their scramble. Again, he pounded and pounded away at his opponent and almost finished Horcher before the end of the first round. It was a dominant showing from the Eagle. At the start of the second round, Nurmagomedov wasted little time in hunting for the takedown. Horcher did his best to defend and forced the Eagle to switch positions a few times. But ultimately, Nurmagomedov got his way and threw him to the mat once more. Nurmagomedov then continued to bother his opponent with punches and nearly finished from the crucifix. Horcher was visibly struggling to save himself, and during the process, allowed Khabib to lock in the body triangle. Khabib then stretched Horcher out, finishing him with a storm of heavy punches. It was an easy win for Nurmagomedov and a nightmare evening for Horcher. After his 2-year layoff, this is precisely what Nurmagomedov needed to do. While it wasn't the springboard opponent that he wished for, propelling him to challenge for the title, Nurmagomedov got the opportunity to remind fans and fighters of his indomitable spirit and otherworldly wrestling skills. While Horcher showed toughness, decent takedown defense, and even some quality offensive striking, nobody expected him to win. With that win, Nurmagomedov had a 23-0 record and was yet to be troubled inside the octagon. Even though it was a win against a lowly ranked opponent, Nurmagomedov wouldn't have to wait for too long before getting his chance to compete for the lightweight title. Dominating performances still awaited. Khabib Nurmagomedov's unbeaten record was put to a difficult test at UFC 219. Khabib was about to face another Brazilian veteran, Edson Barboza. Even though Barboza was a stern challenge, Nurmagomedov ultimately outclassed Edson Barboza in Las Vegas, solidifying his cause for a chance at the title. Barboza started the fight with his leg kicks and had some success. His leg kicks were his most dangerous weapon, but Khabib continued to apply pressure, delivered a few right hands, and attempted a takedown. Barboza did a great job of stopping it, but the next time he wouldn't be as successful. Getting into a top position, Nurmagomedov threw some brutal punches and elbows. As the rounds came to a close, Nurmagomedov continued to throw punches and ragdoll Barboza. Only the horn saved the Brazilian from being defeated. With only 2 minutes remaining in round 2, Barboza had begun to deteriorate visibly, and Nurmagomedov was determined to take him out. Khabib continued to strike his opponent mercilessly, leaving the Brazilian's face in a complete mess. Barboza continued to receive blows while he was on one knee and attempting to stand up, and Khabib eventually forced him on his back and continued to beat him. Barboza began the final round with a couple of leg kicks, but Khabib tracked him down, caught him with some power punches, and landed with a double leg. Barboza, to his credit, was restraining Khabib's renowned wrestling as he posted up with his right hand, but Khabib still managed to knock him down. Barboza was used as a punching bag while on the ground, but he eventually stood up. It was a classic performance from Khabib, whose record went to 25-0. On November 12, 2016, at UFC 205 in New York, Khabib defeated an excellent American striker, Michael Johnson, who had won against Tony Ferguson a few years before. But Michael Johnson had no chance against Khabib's savage beating and tireless pressure. Johnson's quickness and reach advantage were displayed in the first round as he stalked Nurmagomedov across the cage and flicked his dangerous left hand. Nurmagomedov took some punishment before slipping underneath a punch and attempting a takedown. Landing inside control, Johnson did little more than survive, absorbing ground and pound for minutes on end as Nurmagomedov moved effortlessly from dominant position to dominant position. The fight went all the way to the bell, but the outcome was obvious. In the second round, Johnson looked to reassert himself as the superior striker, but he clearly struggled to recover from the thrashing he got in the first round. Nurmagomedov wisely began focusing on takedowns and showed little interest in attempting anything else. Johnson was on his back most of their fight, unable to respond to Nurmagomedov's grappling offense. Johnson was exhausted by the third. Early on, he was hit with a hard uppercut and taken down again. Khabib's thrash talk was a sight to behold. During their fight, he repeatedly told Johnson to quit and told him that he deserved to fight for the title. After tiring of punching Johnson, Nurmagomedov locked up a Kimura, forcing Johnson to tap at 2 minutes and 31 seconds of round 3. It was an example of absolute domination by Khabib, but it was exactly what Nurmagomedov needed to keep his place amongst the lightweight elite. The post-fight interview ignited another rivalry. A rivalry brewing for a few years finally came to light. He was focused on the money fight. I want to stay humble, but I have to talk. Ireland has a population of 6 million people. while Russia has a population of 150 million. I want to go toe-to-toe with your chicken. Let's go, shall we? In fact, during the weigh-ins at UFC 205, McGregor and Nurmagomedov were overheard yelling at one another backstage. Unfortunately, there's only a 9-second video clip in which the two are led in opposite directions while screaming at each other. Regardless, Khabib's goal was just one step away. He seemed to be on track to secure the belt, but unfortunately, fate intervened again. The bout for the interim lightweight championship was scheduled on March 4th, 2017, against none other than Tony Ferguson. However, just a few hours before the fight, Khabib Nurmagomedov fell ill because of overstrain and was taken to the hospital. As a result, the fight between the two best fighters in the lightweight division was called off for the third time. Their fight was again scheduled for UFC 223 for the UFC Lightweight Championship. But on April 1st, 2018, it was reported that Ferguson tore his MCL while fulfilling his media obligations for the UFC. The fight was cancelled, and Dana White commented that he would never reschedule it again. With a week left until fight night, the UFC scrambled to find a replacement, and UFC featherweight champ Max Holloway offered to take the fight. However, a day before the fight, Holloway was ruled physically unfit to compete due to concerns about his rapid weight cut. Paul Felder, who was scheduled to face Al Iaquinta, offered to serve as a short-notice replacement, but he was rejected due to Felder being unranked. Anthony Pettis was also sought as a replacement, but a disagreement emerged over pay. Ultimately, Ragin Al Iaquinta offered to take the fight on a day's notice, and in a swift motion, saved the card. Khabib Nurmagomedov and Al Iaquinta engaged in a brutal fight at UFC 223 at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, New York. The moment has finally arrived. Nurmagomedov finally had his opportunity to compete for the UFC Championship belt. Unfortunately, his father couldn't make the trip to the USA because of visa issues. That made the trip to the octagon bittersweet for Khabib. But still, there was a fight to win, and he could rest assured his father would be watching every one of his moves. Iaquinta took the fight on extremely short notice after the chaos that ensued following the UFC 223 press conference, which involved an argument between Khabib and Conor McGregor's good friend and sparring partner, Artem Lobov, and a dolly accident that Conor featured in. Everyone expected an easy win for Khabib. However, Iaquinta made things difficult for the Dagestani. He started the fight chasing Nurmagomedov in search of landing a finisher and attempted to throw powerful punches while also threatening the takedown. But Nurmagomedov would not be denied the belt. His jab consistently connected with Iaquinta's face, and as Iaquinta fumbled on a few instances, Nurmagomedov took his back. He almost successfully applied a rear naked choke, but Iaquinta gave up the mount. Nurmagomedov persisted in going for the finish with ground attacks and a choke, but Iaquinta resisted and did a good job dodging harm. He was surviving the fight, more than what other fighters can boast of when facing Nurmagomedov. At the start of the fourth round, Iaquinta blocked a few blows, but Nurmagomedov persisted in jabbing him. Still, Raging Al had denied Nurmagomedov's takedowns and still had a full round to get the knockout, his only shot at a win against the Dagestani. A question on many people's minds was whether Khabib could keep up the pace for 5 rounds. Khabib answered those questions when he surprisingly decided to stand with Iaquinta in rounds 3 and 4. To start the 5th round, Iaquinta was finally winning exchanges, but that didn't last long, as Nurmagomedov quickly upped the tempo, shifting to a higher gear and sliced open Iaquinta, knocking him down again. When Nurmagomedov got Iaquinta's back, he locked him down to burn time. There was no question who was the winner in each and every round of this bout. Nurmagomedov dominated the entirety of their fight and secured a unanimous win. But but Iaquinta showed he could compete against the best lightweights by sheer toughness, heart, and skill. Khabib was finally the UFC lightweight champion. In his post-fight interview, he thanked his father and dedicated the win to him. The patient fighter wins. Many fans wondered how he would fare against Tony Ferguson's vicious grappling and Max Holloway's unconventional striking. While there were questions about what this meant for McGregor's own championship status, those were answered shortly thereafter when Dana White announced at the post-fight presser that McGregor had been officially stripped of his second title, and Nurmagomedov was now the undisputed 155-pound champion. Would Nurmagomedov's unbeaten streak have ended with Conor McGregor's lightning-fast left hand instead? Fans would soon have their answer. At UFC 205, the same night Khabib defeated Michael Johnson, Conor McGregor easily defeated Eddie Alvarez to win the UFC lightweight championship. Khabib called Conor out the same night after his submission victory against Michael Johnson and called him a chicken. They chirped at each other during the UFC 205 weigh-ins and built up their animosity further. Millions of fight fans worldwide awaited the announcement of the fight between the two most fearsome fighters facing each other in the octagon. It was the logical next move for both the Dagestani and the Irishman. However, Conor would never defend the title, leaving the UFC to focus on his boxing match against Floyd Mayweather. But the lead-up to the UFC 223 bout made all the headlines and threatened to end McGregor's career in the UFC. Footage emerged showing Khabib's heated encounter with Conor's teammate Artem Lobov. Khabib, surrounded by dozens of his friends and teammates, slapped Lobov for talking behind his back and calling him a coward. Their altercation left Conor fuming. McGregor rounded up his crew and flew down to New York 2 days later, thirsting for revenge. Ultimately leading to the infamous Dolly bus accident. Consumed by rage, after the UFC 223 press conference, Conor and his group located the UFC bus Khabib was in, along with many other UFC fighters. Conor prompted Khabib to get out of the bus and fight on the spot, and threw a metal dolly at the bus, shattering one of its windows, and injuring two of the fighters on the bus, who had to pull out from their scheduled fights. The McGregor vs. Nurmagomedov rivalry was not news. Back in 2015, there were initial indications of this when a supporter asked McGregor about challenging for the lightweight belt before his fight with featherweight champ Jose Aldo. After mulling over his response, McGregor responded, "I think Khabib will get the lightweight belt," when asked who he believed would eventually hold the title. This demonstrates that Conor had been keeping an eye on Nurmagomedov for some time before their heated rivalry began. McGregor turned himself into the police later that day when a warrant for his arrest was obtained. Assault and criminal mischief charges were brought against him. It was a new low for Conor that threatened to derail his MMA career. Still, the UFC could see a record-breaking fight in the making, and Dana White wasn't about to let that opportunity slide.
After the fight on Saturday night, fuck peace. There will never be peace here. I always say you should aim for peace. But if you can't aim for peace, aim between the eyes. And that's it. I'm gonna aim right between that man's eyes. And this is never over. Never, ever, ever over.
Khabib started to talk about stuff from your past. What do you think that means, that he went and looked up information about you?
Here we go. We built it on my time. A little late, a little late. I don't care what he's saying, whatever. It's all good to me, mate. It's closing in on fight time. You just cook yourself in that fucking sauna, you smelly Dagestani rat, and be there on Friday at that weigh-in, and be there on Saturday at that fucking fight. That's it. Say what you want, I don't give a bollocks.
When the heat subsided after the Dolly accident, the UFC announced that Khabib and Conor would finally face each other at UFC 229 in October 2018. Conor was asking for a fight, and he finally got it. The lead-up to the pay-per-view event of UFC 229 saw an unprecedented amount of trash-talking occur between Conor McGregor and Khabib Nurmagomedov. When they shared the stage at Radio City Music Hall for the first news conference leading up to UFC 229, what had been business up until that point became personal. Khabib was known for his thrash talk, reducing his opponents to smithereens, destroying their confidence before destroying their chins in the octagon. Such was the case with Eddie Alvarez, the first fight against Dustin Poirier, and one of his most legendary wins, the one against Jose Aldo. But Conor took his trash talk to another level with Khabib. McGregor addressed Nurmagomedov's connections to Chechen dictator Ramzan Kadyrov and Russian businessman Ziauddin Magomedov. He called his manager Ali Abdelaziz a terrorist snitch. Nothing was off limits to McGregor during that conference. He even took shots at Khabib's father, Abdulmanap Nurmagomedov. He was late to the press conference and used it to promote his new whiskey company, Proper 12. He even offered Khabib, a devout Muslim, a drink and feigned offense when the Dagestani refused his advances. He shouted, he screamed, and tried to kick the Dagestani before they even made the trip to the octagon.
Tomorrow night, I'm gonna smash your boy, guys. I'm gonna smash your boy.
When the date of the fight finally rolled around, UFC 229 became the biggest ever UFC event, with a historic 2.4 million pay-per-view buys, the highest for an MMA event to date. The show was about to start. At the opening of the fight, Conor took his usual wide stance and stalked his opponent. Khabib was moving around more and didn't try to take down Conor immediately. Instead, both fighters fired shots at each other, both landing at times. Even though Conor caught Khabib with a few jabs, Nurmagomedov didn't seem hurt and threw back punches himself. Throughout his years in MMA, Khabib Nurmagomedov was widely known for his superior, unmatched wrestling. It sparked terror in his opponent's eyes. He was simply untouchable on the ground. Fighters were trying everything they could to keep fights against the Dagestani as far away from the mats as possible, hoping they would somehow beat him standing, but to no avail. Yet here he was, standing and exchanging punches with one of the most legendary strikers in MMA history. One of his punches even caught the Irishman straight on the chin and sent him to the ground. It was a brave showing from Khabib, and another example of his confidence and belief in his skills and training. It was an even showing from both fighters, but when Khabib decided to take the fight to the ground, it was clear who would dictate the tempo for the rest of the fight. Even though Conor showed improvements in his takedown defense and rejected a few of Khabib's takedown attempts, Nurmagomedov wouldn't be denied his takedowns. Khabib smothered Conor, pinning him to the cage, making Conor tired and draining his energy. The Irishman caught momentum in a few instances and even took one round from Khabib, the first one that the Dagestani had lost in his career up until that point. When the fourth round rolled around, Conor was visibly tired from all the minutes he spent defending Khabib's smothering takedowns and ground and pounds. Again, Khabib took Conor to the ground and pinned him to the cage again. Conor seemingly was about to get himself out of harm's way, but it was to be Khabib's night. Nurmagomedov slipped his gloves around McGregor's chin in a neck crank, and the Irishman was forced to tap out. A beaten-down Conor leaned on the fence and watched Khabib stroll around the octagon floor, shouting at the Irishman's corner. Even he was surely surprised at the outcome of that exchange. Khabib Nurmagomedov's record remains spotless at 27-0. But in a fight where Khabib secured one of his most important career wins, he lost his temper. He scaled the cage and jumped into McGregor's corner, attacking Dillon Danis, who had provoked Khabib with trash talking. Inside the octagon, Conor also found himself in a brawl with Khabib's cornerman, who had scaled the octagon to confront him, leading them to exchange blows with Conor McGregor. The chaos spilled into the crowd, and the audience in the T-Mobile Arena found themselves attacking each other while supporting their favorite fighter of the two. Luckily, nothing tragic occurred, and security soon subdued the havoc. Dana White suspended both Khabib and Conor McGregor indefinitely.
I know there's a lot of media here tonight, and some of you, this is your first event. I can promise you this is not what a mixed martial arts event is normally like.
Do you feel, Dana, if you had taken action after the bus incident, like had you suspended Conor for, X period of time?
Hey, listen, these guys don't give a shit about suspensions and stuff like this. This is so much bigger. I mean, Khabib wanted to fight him as soon as it was possible. So me going out and suspending Conor definitely doesn't do that for him.
But this thing was so emotionally, politically charged in the build-up to it. Is there any regret that maybe you allowed it to go on or didn't step in?
This isn't the last time. This isn't the last time guys are going to say mean things to each other. It's the fight business, These are groups of people that do not like each other. And I don't think that's going to change.
While the Nevada State Athletic Commission handed out a 9-month suspension and a $500,000 fine to Khabib, while Conor McGregor received a 6-month suspension and a $50,000 fine. Khabib's teammates were also suspended for a year. The agreement also included a potential suspension reduction of up to 3 months if Khabib would agree to deliver a public service announcement on anti-bullying to the commission. Nurmagomedov refused to do so as he believed that the state of Nevada was immoral and permitted acts far worse than a brawl made by Conor McGregor in the lead-up to the fight. Conor's cornerman Dillon Danis was also suspended for 7 months and fined $7,500 for his involvement in the brawl. It was a nightmare evening for Dana White and the UFC, and a dampened win for Khabib against his most hated opponent. Khabib, a devout follower of religion, took insult from Conor's advances and couldn't hold inside the built-up resentment he had accumulated over the previous months. Still, if only for a while, that move tarnished his win, and he would have to repent in the following period, if only before his father. About a year later at UFC 242, Nurmagomedov defended his belt for the second time against the then interim champion Dustin Poirier. Despite Dustin having success early on catching Khabib with a big right hand and even getting him into a tight guillotine choke, he failed to capitalize on the attempt. Nurmagomedov remained calm and slipped out. In the third round, Nurmagomedov caught Poirier in a rear naked choke, tapping Poirier out, retaining the lightweight crown and moving to 28-0. Most importantly, after years of visa problems preventing him from visiting the United States, Nurmagomedov fought in the UFC for the first time with his father Abdulmanap, who got to see his son defend his title in a respectful manner. With 12 victories under his belt, Nurmagomedov was tied for the third longest winning streak in UFC history. 28 fighters entered the cage, hoping to be the ones to stop Nurmagomedov from controlling the fight, and all of them failed miserably. That option seemed less likely as time went by. Each unfortunate opponent must have felt like they were on a death march as they made the long journey to the cage. The patient fighter always wins. On October 24th, 2020 at UFC 254, Khabib Nurmagomedov made his last trip to the octagon. It was a well-deserved and emotional cap in his decorated career after a year of turmoil, mired by his father's passing due to COVID-19 complications earlier that year. Not having his father Abdulmanap by his side was extremely traumatic for the Dagestani native. it was a question on everyone's mind if Khabib would even show up for a fight again. Yet, the bout against G.O.A.T was scheduled. That night, in his bout against Justin Gaethje, many wondered if Khabib would show weakness and whether he'll have the right mindset, the one that made him unstoppable over the years. Yet Khabib showed no emotions in the lead-up to the fight, no signs of weakness. His stoic demeanor was probably a necessity so that he could stay focused on the prize. If he fought for his father's honor before, imagine what went through his mind before his last bout. Everyone would fear facing such an opponent, one that would rather die than see himself defeated mere months after losing his biggest supporter in life. The man that forged him into a person with iron will, discipline, and dedication. That resoluteness was fully displayed from the first second of the fight. Khabib was relentless, always pushing the pace, not allowing Gaethje to take a breather. He harassed him and absorbed punches Gaethje threw that would put the lights out from any other fighter. Gaethje is one of the most fearsome and fearless strikers in the game, but Khabib stood erect before the US fighter, unfazed, throwing haymakers and eating punches, aiming to finish Gaethje with a knockout. Most of their fight, the two warriors were standing up. Khabib's demeanor in the octagon that night showed a different tenacity, a subdued fire waiting to erupt at any moment like a volcano. He wouldn't allow anything or anyone to mess up the legacy of his father. It was his night. But Khabib lost the first round of the fight, raising eyebrows as to how the fight would progress. But the patient fighter always wins. The second round was also mostly fought standing up, with the two fighters trying to end each other with vicious blows, until the inevitable happened. Khabib got Gaethje on the ground and like a snake got his legs around Justin's neck, catching him in a triangle choke. Gaethje struggled to get out and tried to stand up, hoping to relieve the pressure Khabib was applying, but to no avail. He went to sleep. The fight was over. Khabib Nurmagomedov remained the champion after he triangle choked Gaethje in the second round. He could have ended the fight earlier when he caught Gaethje with an armbar, but he chose not to humiliate Gaethje before his family watching from the sidelines by breaking his arm. Instead, he lulled him to sleep. During the post-fight interview, an emotional Khabib sobbed on the octagon floor, visibly shaken, mourning the loss of his father. The memories of the two of them spending countless hours training and shedding tears of happiness after each of Khabib's wins still fresh in his mind. But these were tears of sorrow. Khabib was still grieving, but he could finally let go of his emotions instead of bottling them up. Seconds after waking up from his lull, Gaethje joined him at the center of the octagon to offer his condolences. When he stood up, Khabib removed the tape that secured his fighting gloves. Any fight fan knew what that meant. Khabib was retiring, and when he retired, he did so because of his promise to his mother and the pain he felt fighting without his father by his side. It was devastating for fight fans worldwide to say goodbye to their favorite fighter, but it was a bittersweet goodbye, since we all know it was said out of love for family. So, where does that leave us? Is Khabib the GOAT? 2 years after he's retired, there's still a good case to be made that he really is the greatest of all time. He lost just 2 rounds in his entire career, ending on a legendary 3-win streak against Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier, and Justin Gaethje, all at the height of their career. The most important question is, does that really matter? Whether or not he is the GOAT seems unimportant to Nurmagomedov. He has a new mission, helping his father's favorite student rise to the top of the UFC food chain. Islam Makhachev is on a journey to ensure that he is cemented alongside his brother among the top of the UFC elite. His newly won lightweight title and close win over Volkanovski only made this closer to being real. He also has the surging promotion Eagle FC trying to promote the MMA sport even more in his home country, and inspiring millions of youngsters to follow in his path. Khabib gives them hope, showing them what's possible if you dedicate yourself completely to something you love. Nurmagomedov has done everything in the octagon, and now helps others do the same. He's taken on the role of a teacher and mentor, willing to imbue other fighters with the knowledge and spirit that he conveyed in the octagon and outside of it. The MMA sport will forever be better for it. Another phenomenon perfectly encapsulates Khabib's life. We all know that his record in the UFC is 29-0, a perfect, untarnished record. Yet, the number 29 carries a much deeper significance than this. It often represents a hidden letter in the Arabic alphabet, which consists of 28 letters. The 29th in this case being the conjunction of the lam and aleph, creating the lam aleph, meaning no or negation. It signals the spiritual path of letting go of the ego, surrendering to a higher purpose, and rising to a divine presence. It means leaving behind everything that's good or bad and fulfilling a sacred calling. It means to become nothing, to become zero, and making the ultimate sacrifice in the name of love. Khabib Nurmagomedov left behind a life of abundance, a life of glory. He could have waited and remained the champ for a very long time, making millions in the process. He could have promoted new businesses and lucrative brand deals. After all, before he retired, he was at the height of his popularity, yet he left it all behind. Out of love and loyalty, he sacrificed a pursuit of the material for a relationship with the divine, a promise to a mother, grief for a father. Those are the moments that tell Khabib which path to take in life. So, he listened. He stayed true to his mother's promise. He fulfilled his father's plan, proving yet again that the patient fighter always wins. As of August 2022, our documentary started getting copyright claimed by Combat Sport Promotions. This means, once claimed, we do not earn any money from these videos. With your support, we can continue expanding our dedicated production team, and of course, creating one-of-a-kind content here on YouTube. Please show your support to us through our link below.